Hey everyone, Dr. Brian here again. And today we got another video. This one on the vestibular system or the inner ear system. So in this video, what I really want to talk about is more of the inner ear system and how it relates to therapy. So there's certain things you can do in terms of testing or just evaluation, but more importantly, what do you do to fix it? Because most people that come in have some form of dizziness or fatigue or headaches sometimes, or even pain syndromes. A lot of different things can come from dysfunction of the vestibular system. So it's very important to not only evaluate it, but to also do like the right kind of treatment, or just very, very specific kind of treatment that that will make a difference versus other kinds that some people do that aren't as effective. So when you're looking at the inner ear treatment, what you're really looking at is like there's a certain set of rules that Dr. Schmo abides by, if that makes sense. So meaning like there's certain ways that he'll do it that usually results in a better outcome. It's something that what I wanted to get across to you guys at home, or just any like potential patient, is just what the rules are. I'll talk about Dr. Schmo's kind of preferences and what he likes to do, but just in terms of just general, meaning like if you look at what Dr. Schmo does versus other clinics and things, like what are the differences? Like what makes our vestibular treatment different than like the other place down the road, or like a PT or something like that. So the first rule that I want to talk about in terms of treatment is the difference of gravity versus rotation. So when you're looking at the inner ear, basically it senses, or there's two different parts and it senses two different things. There's one part that senses gravity and changes in gravity, and the other part senses rotation. So when you're testing it, you want to test each separate area like appropriately, but you also, in terms of treatment, depending on what part of the system's off, you want to do treatment that's more specific to that area. And that's typically the hard part. That's where there's a lot of variation, and there's just a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to the therapy. When you're looking at changes in gravity, just in terms of symptoms, typically people will they'll feel floaty, they'll feel lightheaded, they'll feel sometimes rocking on a boat. Sometimes like they'll be more visually stimulated, meaning like if they watch something go by them, like if they're in traffic, or they see something move like an elevator in front of them, even though they're not moving, they'll feel very dizzy or like very faint. Typically, something like that has to do with the gravity system, meaning it's either positional, like you change positions and then you have symptoms, or it's something where you just don't feel stable, you feel disoriented. You don't necessarily have vertigo or something like that. You don't have spinning and things. You just don't feel stable, or you just don't feel very aware of where you are. There's a lot of people that come in with those kind of symptoms, and it's that part of the inner ear that's off. And what happens is that area is really, really hard to, or it's not the easiest, or it's not the most common to treat. A lot of the typical treatments are more for the other part of the system, which is the rotational system. So speaking about that, the rotational system is kind of, as it sounds, what it senses is rotation. So any movement of the body or any movement of your head, that tests that kind of, or that area of the inner ear. More like traditionally, like if you read textbooks or even go to PTs and things, most of their therapy is geared towards that. And there's sort of two categories of that. There's the crystals therapy, and then there's more of the actual head movement therapy. Meaning, most people that have dizziness and they go to like whatever kind of doctor, they'll go in there and the first thought is usually, oh, like it might be a crystal. So they'll like tilt your head back, or like put your head in different positions, trying to trigger the dizziness. And whether it makes you dizzy or not, they'll do a repositioning maneuver called the Epley, where you'll lie down on the table with your head back, and they'll kind of move you like in different positions, and then have you sit up. That therapy works really, really well if it's truly a crystal is in one of the, it's in a part of the inner ear that it shouldn't be. That kind of therapy works really well if it's that. If you're dizzy for something else, I mean, like there's a different part of the system that is off, that or like those like maneuvers usually don't really work well. Meaning a lot of our patients come in and they've had that done and they're like, yeah, it didn't really do anything. But the other thing that typically people do in terms of treatment when it comes to the more of the like rotational system is they'll do head movements, but it'll be active. And that's kind of like the next category that I'm going to talk about, passive versus active. But they'll sit in front of something and they'll just kind of like look at something and then move their head back and forth, up and down, or like left and right. Not that that's a bad therapy, but if done the wrong way or done not at the right time, typically it makes people feel worse, or it just doesn't heal anything, you know. So the first kind of, again, pillar or the first milestone of what you really have to look at and assess is it more of a gravity kind of issue, or is it more of the rotational system kind of issue, or is it both? Moving on to the next kind of category, or like the next pillar that's really important when it comes to inner ear treatment, is the difference between passive therapy and active therapy. So typically, you know, just speaking generally, most of the treatment that Dr. Schmo does is passive, meaning you're not doing anything, it's being done to you. For example, like the difference of you moving your own head, that's more of an active therapy. Somebody moving your head back and forth where you're not coordinating the movement, that's more passive. At least in Dr. Schmo's opinion, it's better earlier on to do passive therapy, because most people think, like when they read books and things, are like the brain heals itself and, you know, things along that line. It's absolutely true. But if you just think of somebody with dizziness and you're like, okay, I have whatever kind of dizziness and it started, you know, 6 months ago. If it was true that the brain could just heal itself, or the brain figured it out or something, you could do very active things. Like you could go walk down the street, or you can go in a car and turn and stuff, or you could like roll around in bed. And if your brain knew how to fix it, it would just fix it right off the bat. So typically, since it doesn't work like that, you have to do something passive. You have to isolate that system and either rehab it or change how it's programmed, or just change how it integrates first, and then move more into an active therapy that kind of deals both with the inner ear system, but also like head movement and coordination and, you know, things like that. It sounds like a small difference, just like, oh, you know, like it's almost the same thing, passive versus active, but it's night and day difference. Most people try to do active therapies too soon and it just doesn't work. And typically people that do active therapy too soon, they'll get symptomatic. Like they'll do a little bit of it and then like they'll feel worse, sometimes for, you know, just a few minutes, sometimes for hours or days. So it's something that, even though it could be the best thing, if done the wrong way or not at the right time, it could be, you know, really, really bad. So typically, at least what Dr. Schmo does in his clinic is he'll do passive therapy at least first. Sometimes people get passive therapy for like the entirety of their treatment, and their home exercises are more active. But that passive aspect is really, really important. It can't be understated how important that is. And almost everybody gets something passive, or at least mostly passive, during their initial treatment, if not most of their treatment. Moving on to the next kind of category or like pillar is the difference between being general and being very specific. And this is something a lot of people talk about, but to get really in depth with the inner ear system, a lot of people will, you know, like when they go to different places or different doctors, like they'll have exercises, but typically what they'll do, I'm like, show me your exercises, or like, show me what you've done in the past. And they'll like, like, I'm just gonna move my head back and forth equally, you know, like same speed, everything like that for as long as I can. I call that kind of general, meaning it's like both sides, speed really doesn't matter. Like you're just moving as fast as you can. Like you're just, you know, like doing as much as you can. It's just kind of like, you know, in my opinion, you're just looking at, just do that and hopefully something sticks, like shotgun approach. Like I hope the brain kind of figures it out. I'm gonna do something with movement, and man, like hopefully things just kind of figure themselves out. Typically, even when it comes to just really any kind of training or any kind of rehab, being general like that typically doesn't work too well. When you're being specific, what that means is, part of it means, like, again, are you going to do more of, you know, treatment for the gravity system, or just more of the like rotational system? But even more than that, you can be really specific as to like the sidedness, meaning one inner ear system versus the other one. Even just doing treatment that biases one side versus the, you know, versus the other side if you can do things that bias the weaker side, so you can actually strengthen that and not just, do things too much to the good side. Sometimes that's the key to just healing the system, is just doing things more on the weaker side, or on the like imbalanced side. But more than that, looking how the inner ear system actually works, is there's different canals, or there's different like directions that the inner ear senses. So you can be really specific as to, not only left versus right, but like left and backwards, or right and forwards, or I'm going to do something to the left and then change positions on it. The whole system does integrate together, meaning like the whole gravity system and the rotational system, they're not the same per se, but they do integrate together. So it's important sometimes to kind of mix and match it, where you want to do, something for the gravity system here, and then do something with the like rotational system in a certain plane right after, or like vice versa. The more specific you can get to the actual plane or the side that's off, the better chance you have of actually fixing it. Moving to the next kind of category, repetition and frequency. So why this is important is, a lot of people who Dr. Schmo sees, is sometimes they'll do inner ear treatment, but when they do, it's typically speaking, it's not very frequent, or it's not very like repetitive. It's kind of like the old standard of, I'm going to go to the, clinic, or I'm going to go to the, center or whatever, 3 times a week for 3 months, and I'm going to do inner ear treatment the whole time. The hard part typically with the inner ear system when it gets off is, since it senses gravity, typically speaking, most people like if there's an error signal or there's an imbalance, they're always in that imbalance, or they're always getting that error signal, meaning it's always there because gravity isn't being integrated well. Even if it has to do with rotation, like let's just say, for example, someone comes in and they're like left side's weak. They're like, I turn right or something like that, and I'm absolutely fine. I do anything to the left, like with head movement or like my body turning, and I just feel awful. What happens is that system has found its kind of balance, or kind of its comfort zone, if you will. And the hard part to change that is it can't just be every once in a while. Typically, you have to really hammer that system, or you really have to do something very, very frequently to make that system change. Doing a little bit, like, doing 20 minutes every, like 3 times a week, when you look at the other part as like, hours of the week that the system's just functioning, like not normally, that leads to, even if you're doing the right treatment, the system actually doesn't change, because like there's not enough good signals or like rehab coming in that makes the system change. So what we do, which I know is talked about in different videos, ours is a lot more repetitive, and it's a lot more frequent, meaning we do our therapies multiple times a day, day after day after day, typically. So it's one of those things that even if people come in with something like this, like number one is the ability of that system to change is really good. Most people, even though like some people do come in with like structural changes, most people have nothing structurally wrong. So you're looking at the functional capacity of that system to change is really good. But then what it comes down to is doing the right kind of treatment. You have to do something specific to the inner ear, but you also have to make it frequent enough, or just repetitive enough, that system changes from how it was working coming in. And I mean, it's honestly that straightforward. Like, if you do something that's really good, but not enough, you won't get the same result as if you do the right thing for the right amount, like over the right amount of time. So that's why we do more intensive treatment. Is it usually takes more than just a couple times to fully like change that system and to get it fully stabilized. Like the last thing that I want to talk about is, in terms of treatment, even, like whether you're looking at the visual system, the like proprioceptive system, or the inner ear system, it's good to do treatment that isolates like the like inner ear. Like, okay, like we're going to do something that, is just very specific, inner ear only. That's important to a certain degree. You don't want something that's too dynamic, because then people will just compensate. Like if you truly have an inner ear weakness, or something wrong with the inner ear, like it's not functioning right, you want to do something in treatment that's really specific to that. that is truly an inner ear activity or an inner ear exercise. But more than that is, like to like really fully stabilize it, you have to look at how the other parts of the brain or how the other systems interact with the inner ear. Meaning, most people, if you just look at motion sickness or something like that, where people are in a car, they're just walking down the street and they get motion sick. I get nauseous or I get dizzy, I just get really disoriented. And let's just pretend that it's a visual mismatch with the inner ear. Like the visual inputs telling your brain something, but your inner ear is telling it something different. Happens all the time. What you really have to do is you have to isolate each one. Like you might want to do visual treatment alone, or just certain activities that are just really just visual, like exercises, and do inner ear exercises that are just inner ear specific, just making that inner ear system process differently. But typically towards the end, as those systems get better individually, you have to put it together. Like you have to make sure that the visual system can interact with the inner ear system, meaning like it has to interpret both signals at the same time, or things will break down. Meaning people will, sometimes they'll like come in and they're like, yep, if I rotate, it's fine. Or if I'm like, watching movement, it's fine. But if I go to like a crowded area, like the store or like a mall, and I'm moving and things are moving around me, then, oh man, like I just feel awful. Sometimes it's not really a, problem of one system or the other. It's like how they interact. So in terms of treatment, what Dr. Schmo does is he makes sure that there's some treatment that isolates, the visual system, isolates the inner ear system, but he also makes sure that some therapies do both, that they make both systems interact together, or like the proprioceptive system and the inner ear system, and so on and so forth. Just to kind of end this talk on inner ear treatment and things like that, like the last thing, and this is more of my opinion on the matter. If you're doing the right thing, meaning like if you're dizzy and you're like, yep, I should, like I need some inner ear treatment. If you're doing the inner ear treatment the right way, typically speaking, you won't feel worse. Doesn't mean that your symptoms don't change. Like they might go up and kind of down, but there's a lot of people that come in that Dr. Schmo sees, and they're like, man, every single time I left other treatments, I would just feel awful. I'd be, so dizzy, and it'd take me hours to finally get back down. Typically speaking, I'm like, that's probably not, like, you're not doing the right kind of treatment, or it's just not being done the right way, or it needs to be changed or tweaked a little bit. Because most of the people that Dr. Schmo sees, we can do the treatment and have people not only feel better, but not have it really feel worse. Other than maybe fatigue, people can do inner ear exercises and they're like, I don't feel worse, or my symptoms aren't more. And really, like, if you look at this list again, it's like those rules that really make that possible. Being passive, being specific, making sure that, it's really frequent, but not too much, with breaks and, like throughout the day. And then really just like being specific to whatever system's off. If it's more the gravity system, more of the rotational system, things like that. So, which I hope this helps. Like I do know that the whole inner ear system and how it like relates, or just how it works, or just what you do for treatment, it's very misunderstood. Like there's a lot of different things going on, but hopefully this helps. If you guys have questions, comments, let us know. Like there should be a link down like below this video, like to our website that has phone numbers, emails. Let us know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.